People. Engagement looks good on you. Thanks for being here. We're happy to have you. So anyone who can see us, and some of you will be listening to the podcast, but can see that Marcos isn't here today. Marcos Melitzis is off on some PTO, hopefully enjoying himself. But I, instead of Marcos, have one of my favorite people to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is messaging. And we have Jennifer Fernandez Ancona of Way to Win. Now, anyone who's a regular has seen Jennifer before. She has joined us. We threatened to make her one of the co-hosts at one point without her knowing. She never even came close to accepting, by the way. It's just that Marcos and I voted maybe we would just make her a co-host. It was just the two of us. So anyway, but and she is going to help us dive into messaging. They have some her organization, Way to Win. It's a liberal group that focuses on campaign messaging, organizing, and electing progressive candidates. And she's going to help us sort through some of the messaging potential for next year for Democrats and Joe Biden, some of the pitfalls. And I think it's going to be interesting. So thank you for coming, Jennifer. We are happy to have you.
Thanks so much, Carrie. It's awesome to be here. I love being an honorary co-host, and so happy to step in and, attempt to fill Marcos's big shoes, which of course will be challenging, but I'll do my best.
Of course, but you have a specific area of expertise that we are tapping into today. So, and apparently Way to Win has been working on some, it's been working on some research about messaging going into next year. So Jen's going to share some of that with us too. But let's start out. It strikes me that, okay, let's just assume, because I think this is probably where we will end up, although we can't 100% say for sure, but we will probably end up with, we know that Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee, and that likely Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee. That's the likely scenario that we are facing next year, this rematch from 2020.
Yeah. Based on what we know now, yes. But a lot could change, right? Trump is facing a lot of criminal indictments. He is going to be on trial. We just don't know what is going to happen. And so I think we have to be prepared for all scenarios, which includes Trump-Biden rematch and possibly someone else from the Republican side.
That's fair. That's very fair. And I think, it's wise to not be settled for sure. I will add that, even with, even with being, under indictment 90 plus criminal counts, right?
Yeah.
Donald Trump has continued, as we have talked about ad nauseum, to mostly dominate the primary, the Republican primary.
Totally.
We just got the Iowa poll, the Ann Seltzer Iowa poll out, and it had been shown, to some extent in the previous poll that they did in October, right? She's the Iowa guru. She's kind of it was a Des Moines Register, Mediacom, NBC News poll, but it was conducted by Seltzer and Company. And that's kind of the poll. And it showed that even though in October he was down, Trump was down around, mid 40s, like 43, 44, 45%. Now he's at 51% in the latest poll. So he's actually, as people have dropped out, instead of that helping the
other candidates,
right, really boosting the other candidates, he's, it's helped him consolidate more. Ron DeSantis is now in second at 19%, which is a mild improvement for him since October. He was at 16% tied with Nikki Haley, and Nikki Haley is now at 16%. And, in this, and then everyone else, Vivek Ramaswamy and Chris Christie, they're in single digits at like 4 or 5%. So it's between those three. Anyway, so we're seeing, it's looking Trumpy. I'm just going to say that. Okay. So we don't have to dwell on that. I'm going to assume that this is the most likely scenario, a Trump-Biden rematch. And what's striking me about this messaging environment and you may feel differently, is that we have two candidates that are very well known, and it feels like a lot of public opinion is already baked in. And that can be, public opinion can be hard to move when that's the situation. So I wanted to
Yeah.
go ahead. What do you think about that?
No, I agree with you. I think that's a good setup, and that is exactly what's happening, on
Right.
both sides. So you were gonna bring up something about the efforts to go after Trump?
Yeah, so I wanted to just, on both sides of the aisle, real quick, mention, without dwelling on them, mention some of the messaging that I think were kind of misses or didn't really work, in particular on the Trump side. Okay,
Mhm.
so for instance, there was an effort by a couple different PACs to get primary voters, Republican voters, off of Trump,
Mhm.
and using voters who have voted for Trump to say, hey, I loved him. I loved his presidency, but, this isn't, we need someone who can win, or, something along those lines. I didn't like the way he handled COVID, as in he shut down the country for a short amount of time. I mean,
Yeah.
they tried all kinds of things. None of them seemed to work. Let's listen to one from Iowa. This was done by a PAC called Win It Back PAC. And it's a conservative organization that is anti-Trump, and is now anti-Trump, and tried to persuade Iowa voters to not vote for Trump. Let's hear a 30-second ad from them.
Donald Trump was one of the best presidents in my lifetime. We're not seeing that kind of leadership from Biden now. It's really sad. I think there's a lot of reasons why Trump lost. About every other day you'd go, why did he say that? I mean, it still continues today. There's definitely Trump fatigue. It's too bad. I think he'd do a good job, but I don't know if we can get him elected. I think it's too risky for the country. Try someone else.
Right. So as we just discussed, it looks like Trump is surging in Iowa.
Well, it helps when you start the anti-Trump ad with the statement, "Trump's the best president I've ever seen." I mean, it really is like a classic sort of negation tactic that doesn't work, where they're basically giving airtime to the idea that Trump is great, and then trying to undermine that at the end, saying, "Oh, I think it's too risky." I just don't think people pay close enough attention. I mean, you really have to pay attention to that ad, to the words, to parse that they're saying, that the guy is actually saying Trump is not right. Because most of the time he's just talking about how Trump is kind of great and Biden sort of sucks. Like, it doesn't put you in a frame for the Republican primary, and it doesn't give the viewer like a sense that they're even in a Republican primary. Like, to me, it just totally misses the mark from the goal that you would think it has to actually drive more Republican primary voters towards Trump. It just doesn't exist. Like, the constituency that I think this ad is trying to speak to doesn't really exist inside of the Republican coalition right now. It's more of a general election strategy.
That's totally fair. Totally agree. The one thing I will say is clearly they were trying to, disarm people by starting, all of the ads that I saw start off with something like, he was the best president I ever saw, or I loved it when Trump was president, or something. I voted for, I'm a Trump voter, that type of thing. So they
Yeah.
all started off that way in order to try to disarm people and allow them to get their message. But, obviously it didn't work. So I think there's something to be said for all of the points you made. There was
Mhm.
on the other side of the aisle. So there was another effort, and I don't have the ads handy, but Team Biden put in some very early money. It poured, like, I don't know, I want to say around $25 million
Yeah.
into messaging, an ad buy in swing states, sort of playing up Biden on things like Ukraine. And I'm not sure, some other, you may know better
I
than I
do.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a lot around the different kind of accomplishments that were passed by Biden and the Democrats in the 22 year. So it was everything from efforts to curb inflation with the Inflation Reduction Act, efforts to invest in clean, green energy jobs. That also was from the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of the infrastructure projects that were funded as part of the CHIPS Act and things like that. So that is roughly the shape of it.
Right. Okay. So the conclusion based on battleground state polling right now is that it didn't really, my conclusion, okay, and many other people's conclusions, which I'm happy to be challenged on, is that it didn't really move the needle much. That it's, but I just have to say, people, it's a battleground states are battleground states, right? They are close. And that's why they're called battlegrounds. But the battleground state polling suggests, obviously a very tight race. I don't know what some people were looking for in terms of moving the needle. Were we suddenly going to see Biden surging to like 55% approval rating? Very unlikely. You know what I mean? Like, no, that's never going to happen. So, anyway, go.
That's
So
right.
what do you think about the effectiveness? And let's just say these ads, because we often talk about the frame of, is the next election, can we make it a choice between Biden and Trump, or is it going to be a referendum on Biden? And in this case, most of these ads were just playing up Biden's wins, right? They weren't making the comparison yet to Trump. So
yeah, which is absolutely natural and necessary at this point in time, right? Trump isn't the nominee yet, and so we don't necessarily want to drum him up as the nominee when we don't know that that's true. I mean, that messaging will come the minute there is clarity with the Republican electorate on who they choose. Those ads are ready to go. That is the best message. The contrast message is the best message. But there's something that should be done. Like, there is something that can be done and should be done earlier, which is exactly what they did. In many respects, it was important to put real money into something about what Biden had done, because it's really because of the media environment. I think that's one of the biggest. Biden is really a victim of the media environment that we're in right now, and just the environment of like what we call the poly crisis, right? Like all the different kinds of crisis that people are dealing with. His approval rating may not ever go up because people are just pissed about everything right now and upset and overwhelmed. And so they're not going to say they like anything. So whoever's in charge is likely going to have a bad approval rating. I think it's more about the environment than Biden in particular himself. And then I will say, like, yes, it didn't move the needle on the horse race polling, but again, I don't think we can put a lot of stock in that horse race polling a year out. It's sort of meaningless. Like, it does give you a clue that it's very close, which we know this election that we've known for a while, it's going to be very close. It's giving us clues that we're losing support with certain demographics. We have to put a lot of effort into telling better stories and reaching, younger people and people of color who are sort of slipping from the coalition right now. But again, it's a year out, and people are being asked to try to project into the future what they think they want. And I think they're using these polls as, in many ways, a proxy for just how shitty they feel about how America is going. I think that is really the issue. And it has to do with like the Republicans in Congress who are not letting any progress happen, who are absolutely holding they've held the country hostage multiple times this year, right? On the brink of total collapse with default. That was a whole thing we had to deal with because of them, that like results in people's overall shitty feelings. So I just think I think the question is, what needle did it move? And I would say the needle that it moved, as best as I can tell, is that when we were talking, maybe it was several months ago or last year, literally in the polling, no one could name anything Biden had done. It was like they thought that he literally had done nothing. Everyone is just like, I mean, all the focus groups is like, nada, like nothing. Like and that was a problem because you don't want people to like feel that nothing got done when Democrats were in charge. So the needle that I think did get moved from that ad spending was actually awareness and knowledge about the things Biden had done. It hasn't moved the electoral horse race needle, like to your point, but in some of the Navigator polling that I have seen more recently, it has moved people's awareness like maybe 10 points or something. Like before they didn't know about the Inflation Reduction Act. Now they do know about the Inflation Reduction Act, and that sort of leads us to the point we are now. That knowledge about the Inflation Reduction Act has not like solved all the problems that people feel about the economy, but it did do something to move that needle. And then I think what was important about go ahead, jump in.
Let me just reinforce the basic awareness being an issue, because we've been watching polling forever that shows that basically, I mean, forever since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, or
Yeah.
since the American Rescue Plan was passed, and the subsidies that were included in there, and all of these things. And people they really don't get either why they did get something, didn't get something. They don't get that how much money, what a historic package that infrastructure package was. Many of them don't know that we are creating jobs like gangbusters, and that job creation is crazy high, and that
Yeah.
unemployment is crazy low. Like, people don't really understand these things, these really basic indicators, and big ticket accomplishments by Biden. So that is useful. That is a useful a measure. Yeah.
It is useful, and it was necessary, even though it sort of feels like screaming into the void. I get that. It was somewhat necessary because there was not coverage happening in the regular media. There was like an active sort of campaign by the Republicans, like with their media ecosystem, to be saying nothing has happened, everything is terrible, the economy is terrible, Biden has done nothing. I mean, that was really drowned out. So it's like, or that drowned out sort of any positive news that might happen, but it's just the press doesn't cover positive news, and they don't, there just isn't an incentive to do that. And so it did feel like a good idea to put paid advertising money behind it, just to have something out there saying what Biden had done when the media environment wasn't getting that job done, and in fact on the right was getting like a complete surround sound against everything Biden was doing.
I agree. I when I wrote it up, I thought it was a smart thing to do, which was to
Yeah.
invest this money early. And it is early money. Like, most, like, I'm trying to think, Barack Obama didn't start spending until spring or even fall of the year of his reelect. I mean, he did not spend money the year before his reelect.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
this is unusually early to spend money on an ad buy like this. And I did think, look, no one knows what Biden's done. So there could be something reasonably good about just setting a baseline.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But we do have a lot of
go
work
ahead.
to do, to your point. We have a lot of work to do to build off of that and to tell a better story that actually can make these accomplishments land better and come to life
Right.
a little bit better.
So one of the things I noticed after, so we've had obviously some special elections that have mostly gone very, very well for
Yeah.
Democrats overall, and that's a really positive sign. I think we're at like we're in terms of special elections right now. I think Democrats, Daily Kos Elections tracks this, and I think Democrats are running 7 to 8 points ahead of where they normally what you would expect based on the lean of the districts that they have happened in.
Mm.
But we also had these Virginia elections, right, that went
Yeah.
very well for Democrats. Democrats ended up in control of both houses, basically, a total blockade of Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin's
Yeah.
aspirations to pass some very conservative anti-freedom legislation. So that was huge. And after that, Ron Brownstein, who's kind of like, if I could write like him, I would. That
He's amazing.
he's amazing, and he has this sort of encyclopedic knowledge of a lot of very important statistics, demographic statistics, and it really grounds him in everything he does and everything he writes.
Mhm.
But you talked to him after that Virginia election, and you noted that, like, you said, once again, we saw that what voters say in polls can be very different than what they do when faced with a stark choice between Democrats who are fighting for a better life for families and dangerous candidates who are dead set on taking away their rights and freedoms. And then you said we have an opening here with this effective framing around people's freedoms. And now we can push forward on economic messaging. So I think I want to spend the bulk of the rest of our time talking about the opportunities with economic messaging. And, because this is, look, we've got Democrats, I think we can agree, and Marcos and I talk about this a lot, but have a really strong message on being pro-freedom, on allowing people to the reproductive health care that they need and the freedom to make those decisions when they need it. We just had that case in Texas, for instance, where a woman was pregnant. She had a fetus that had a fetal, tragically had a fetal abnormality that it wasn't, if it could even survive into birth, was going to, pass very tragically shortly thereafter. And if she wasn't able to get an abortion or the proper, reproductive care that she needed, she could be prohibited from having any more children, getting pregnant again. And she clearly very much wants a child. So she appealed to this, she appealed the legal system basically in order to try to be able to get this abortion in Texas. The one court ruled, I think, in favor of her, and then it was put on hold. And then the state Supreme Court ultimately ruled against her. And she decided that she had to go to another state to get that abortion, which many people do not have the resources, the time, they don't, that's not a luxury that they have. Thank goodness she could. But the point is that now, this is a Republicans' America where they want to insert the government in making, vital decisions about personal decisions about what kind of healthcare people can get. So anyway, I think this freedom message, this pro-freedom message for Democrats is very good. But we also have a lot to work on in terms of the economy, because there's some pre-baked in bias, I think, and unwarranted bias, but bias in favor of Republicans on the economy in some ways. So let's talk about that a little bit. What do you think the challenges are, Jennifer, in this?
Yeah. Well, just to reiterate or sort of underscore your point, the messaging that we saw work really well in the midterm elections, right, where we sort of defied all these expectations, was making it about people's rights and freedoms rather than making it a simple referendum on Biden's performance or how the economy was doing at that moment, which was terrible because we're still working on coming out of COVID and getting these policies put in place. So I think that it was important in the midterms to make the election about those things. And as we saw throughout in 2023, we saw in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court, we definitely saw it in Ohio with the ballot measure, and then in Virginia, as you noted, with the kind of push up against Youngkin and the in the beginning of the year, I was hearing just like, oh, Virginia's gone, like Youngkin's got it. There's no way we're going to win. And we didn't give up, way to win certainly helped. We pushed, we worked with the locals in Virginia just to say, what more can we do? And it ended up being really important to make that narrative really clear, to make that contrast narrative really clear about the extreme way that Youngkin was going to take over the government and all of the things that he was going to do to take away people's freedoms. People didn't understand that in the early part of the election cycle. And only when they did understand those stakes, that's what I was trying to get at with that statement I made. When people understand the stakes and they go to the voting booth, they are choosing to protect rights and freedoms over the sort of extreme MAGA Republicans. And so we didn't want to give up there because, of course, no matter what is happening, people always feel the economy is important. Economic issues are always a top issue, no matter how you when or how you ask it. People always will lift up that economy and jobs and those things. It's very top of mind, very salient for voters. And historically, there's a correlation between whether voters see a candidate or a party as effective on the economy and whether that party or candidate wins. Like we've seen that just over time. So I think that some of the key challenges are, number one, you said this. Republicans just have a brand advantage when it comes to the economy writ large. That's something that they have put a lot of effort into, creating kind of a conventional wisdom about. And then I've said for a long time, I don't think the Democrats have ever really gotten clear. It's like hasn't been a strong enough sort of there hasn't been a strong enough like alignment about our own vision for what we want the economy to be on the Democratic side. So it just doesn't match up. So that's one challenge. And the other challenge is like there used to be a thing that's called that's like the rising tide lifts all boats, like that sort of idea. And where we are now, where like the K-shaped recovery coming out of COVID, it's just really rampant inequality. And the way that the Republicans have organized and used their power to make all of these things worse, to pass the giant tax cut that was primarily for wealthy people and corporations when they did have power. Like all of that has led to this rampant inequality. So when some people do well, it doesn't lift the other people. That's the whole point of the K-shaped recovery. Like many people did very well after COVID, and then like many people did much worse. And so there isn't a sense that if the economy does better, that I'm going to do better, that people understand that better now in a way that they really didn't before. And then the other challenge is there's just like a lot of cynicism. It's like out there in the world and voters' minds, there's kind of it's kind of like an unprecedented moment of distrust in institutions and generally people feeling very cynical. So it's hard to convince them that the economy is great, and partially it's because they don't really care how the economy is doing because of that point that I said, which is that they don't necessarily feel the impact of it doing so great, right? So all of those things that's sort of the sea that we're swimming in. Now there's like the bright spots, or like the place. Oh, go ahead.
Can
Yes.
I just interject that like this is why people in the midterms, a lot of like old timey analysts and whatever were like Democrats are going to get creamed. I mean, so even though the polls actually weren't necessarily showing that, but in terms of the races themselves, the contests themselves, but there's this old like right track, wrong track sort of metric that typically if the wrong track metric is really high and a vast majority of people view it that way, it accrues poorly to the party that's in control of the White House, the Democrats in the midterm, right? And this isn't the way it turned out. I mean, the right track, wrong track, the wrong track was off the charts going into the midterms. But the point was, it wasn't just that people were like, the country's on the wrong track and it's all Democrats' fault. Everyone was ticked off. Everyone felt like we were on the wrong track. That didn't mean that they were voting against Democrats. It didn't mean that they were voting against the party in the White House that controlled the White House. So I just listened to analyst after analyst saying, well, I've never seen the right track, wrong track like this. And, it's definitely going to be bad for Democrats. I mean, they kept pounding that home. Yeah. And that turned out not to be true because because frankly, voters were smart enough to say, I'm kind of ticked off about everything, but discerning enough to like not necessarily aim all their fury at Democrats in particular. Anyway, so I just wanted to underscore that. Yeah. So go ahead.
I totally agree. And that's the thing we have to remember is that we're just living in different times than we've ever lived in before. So, it would have made sense that with how people felt about economy, jobs, and inflation in the polling going into the midterms, that we would have gotten crushed. But because we were able to get out a message and make it and get that drumbeat echoed all throughout so many different campaigns and organizations, it actually, and Biden himself, bringing it to the forefront and making those great speeches on democracy issues.
Yep.
The concerns people had about democracy and abortion together overtook how people felt about inflation and the economy. We saw that in the polling that we did after the fact, that they literally said, yes, I cared about these things, but those other two issues together were actually, I cared about that more. And that overtook people's decision making when it came to the midterms. So
Right.
we may be in that same position, right? When we're in the presidential election, we just don't know. It's just that historically, a presidential election is more about economic issues than other things. So we just want to be prepared for that.
Right.
So part of what we need is to have like a frame that can be repeated over and over again. We've talked about that, how repetition really matters. And we want people to understand what we're saying. And I think that the protect our freedoms is such a good contrast. It's such a good thing to bring into the contrast message, because you can just easily say, like, we know that the Republicans just want it, all they want to do is take away our freedoms, whether it's to have a, decide whether we want to have a child, or to have our election, like be able to decide who wins elections. Like, voters should be able to decide that, but they want to take that away. So
Or
that's
ban
really,
books.
or
Like,
yeah, ban books, all the things.
there are all kinds of things. Yeah, it's crazy.
And then we've also talked about how, like, you could think of economic, like we like to say, the kitchen table issues, right? And that's sort of like a single issue, like economics, it's a single issue. But we don't live single issue lives. And the Republicans are not using only single issue attacks against us, as we have noted on this podcast too before, the attacks around trans rights, the attacks around abortion, the attacks around, like racial justice issues. So we want to have a framework that resonates with people and that gives us a chance to rebut all of those issues as well. So we want to make sure we're not just stuck on the kitchen table, because rather we want to go from the kitchen table to the whole house, which is what we're putting out there, that it's about people's lives and not about just the economy. And the more we broaden the conversation and focus the conversation, not just on economic indicators, but on the indicators of people's lives and what they actually feel, we can talk about our issues, and we can talk about our accomplishments in a way that will land a little bit better with them, and that still gives us a chance to bring in the contrast. The point I was going to mention before is the populism contrast is also really important. When we listened to voters all across the country, the idea that Democrats are on your side and fighting for working people, like the hot labor summer that really like showed how people are taking control of, being on the picket line, Biden being there with the auto workers, all of that really has helped. People are blaming corporations. They want to blame corporations for price gouging and for rigging the rules to take the wealth people create away. That's all really salient. And we just need to talk about it much, much more. And we need to make sure that our overarching message that we are repeating over and over again has that in it. Because if we don't, voters will absolutely default to a more conservative explanation of why things are hard, which goes to, people being lazy and wanting to take handouts, or taxes being too high and that kind of thing. So that's what we've been learning. And those are the most important things for us to hammer as we go into this new election year.
So this is kind of the other side of the coin of what's baked in for Republicans. And I'm keeping my eye on the clock because I know you have a meeting, so I don't want to run you right up against it. But let's just take a few minutes here. The other side of the coin is, like, the first part was, well, Republicans have sort of a baked in advantage on people generally thinking that they're better stewards of the economy, which, by the way, is not true.
Not true.
Look it up. Do your own research. You know what they say. Do your own research. Okay, so that's not true, but that's what they've managed to get people to think. It's a baked in bias. Okay, another baked in bias is that Democrats are more worried about working people, are more on the side of working people. Mm-hmm. So it feels to me like this is an area where Democrats can kind of work with that message, and it fits right into your idea of the corporations, price gouging, things like that. But also, so I regularly look at a bunch of polling. I look at the tracking that Civics does, because that's our own company. And so, like, I always am, like, looking at those indicators to see if anything's moving. I will tell you that I've been looking for the past, like, 2 years at this, which party do you think is more concerned with people like you? And Democrats are always about 10 points ahead of Republicans on that scale. So somewhere around 41% of people have been saying for the past 6 months that they think Democrats are more on their side, and only 32% are saying that Republicans are on their side. So that's something that Democrats can exploit and work with, because it also happens to be true. I mean, it's true.
It
So
is. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really true. And that's kind of what my point is, that, or our point is, that we should be setting the terms of the debate. We should be having it on the terrain that's the most favorable to us. And that terrain is when it comes to people's lives, their whole lives, working people, etc.
yeah. Yeah. So, all right, we're going to wrap it up. I want to say one last thing. I want to ask you one last question, because I've
Okay.
been fascinated by this issue of the American dream and how it doesn't resonate with people hardly at all anymore. The latest Wall Street Journal poll found that just 36% of voters view the American dream as attainable, right? The
Yeah.
proposition that anyone, I mean, the American dream means different things to different people. Some people it's
Yeah.
like, well, I can have kids and a house and a car. Other people, the more general idea is that if you work hard, you can get ahead. That's the more general idea. And it's
Yeah.
really not resonating with people. So do you think, I don't want to say what is going on here. That's too long an answer. But can the American dream be reframed, or is it something that we just, at this point need to paint a different vision?
Yeah, I'm more on the paint a different vision. At least right now, I think it's hard for people, given everything that I talked about, like how kind of overwhelmed people are, how much people are just struggling. Like that was literally the number one word. And we did a bunch of polling and a bunch of focus groups of all kinds of voters, all races, different economic backgrounds, etc. And honestly, struggling was the top word. It's like people are really, really struggling. And for good reason. It's because we haven't fixed many of these issues, like housing costs are 45% higher over the past few years, right? And we had to get through a global pandemic, unprecedented, first of its kind that we've experienced, which changed things, which really dramatically shifted things, and prices went up, even though the rate of inflation is back down to a pretty normal rate of 3%. Prices from 2019 to now have gone up 26%. So people still feel that when they go to the grocery store, right? So the American dream feels very far-fetched for people because they're working harder than they ever have, and they're not making ends meet. They don't feel like they're getting ahead. I think that's part of why it just doesn't resonate or land anymore. But this idea of like a better life, or making a good living and having a good life, people resonated with that idea, the idea of freedom to thrive. Like something about that resonated with people. Like they're ready to, I think about the kind of life that they want. One of the biggest things that they wanted was stability. So
Mhm.
that's really different than an American dream. You know what I mean? Dream and stability feel sort of different. Like people just
Right.
want stability. So it's hard to dream when you don't even feel stable. So that's why I
Right.
think the idea of the better life is good, because it's like a step forward, and it's a way that they can see all the things that would make their life better, not just, sort of the elements of the American dream, which you think of, which is like a house and a good job. And it's just more of these economic indicators. Whereas a
Right.
better life is like, how about your kids go to school and you don't have to worry about them getting shot,
Right,
that
right,
kind
right,
of thing,
right. Oh God.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna wrap it up on this note, and I'm just gonna say that if Democrats can keep the message broad around stability, then Trump is bad news when it comes to stability. Do you know what I mean? But if it's
Yeah.
a narrow focus on the economic indicators and whatever, then
Yeah.
some people are going to say, well, Trump was pretty good on that stuff, right?
Yeah.
That was stable. It wasn't, because he lost more jobs than basically anyone in history during the
Yeah.
pandemic. But his voters just lop off that final year of his presidency. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
treating us to
Carrie.
some of your insights. That's Jennifer and Fernandez Ancona from Way to Win. They do great work. We will look forward to having her back next year as we find out more and hone the messages. But thank you all for tuning in, joining us. We hope that you were having a joyous holiday season in whatever way, whatever capacity you celebrate. Hopefully you're finding community and you're able to dream a little bit. Hopefully there's just a moment that you can feel some expansiveness this season. Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer. And we will see you.
Happy holidays to you too.
Yeah. Happy holidays. And I don't even know if we're going to see you again next week. Maybe. Okay. Maybe we'll do another one next week. Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Sounds good. Bye.